So I wanted to bring in Mamta and Cormac, please. Guys, for this section, we're very excited. I'm going to introduce Mamta and Cormac, but then they're going to talk a bit about their work. But please just make sure to put in your questions there as well, because we will have time for questions. And I just want to say thank you, everybody, for sticking out and listening to all of these presentations across different seas. And I'm so happy to have this moment with Mamta and Cormac. Mamta is the director of She Changes Climate, which is a global network that has arms in Kenya, Nepal, Brazil, India, France, and Zimbabwe. So a lot of the places that we have members as well. And its vision for the future is where climate action is driven by inclusivity, equity, and global collaboration, creating a healthy planet for generations to come. And we have Cormac Cullinan, an environmental attorney and author based in Cape Town, who is not only the director of his own law firm, Cullinan and Associates, but the Wild Law Institute as well, which is a nonprofit organization that advocates for the rights of nature. And so the idea of this space when we were designing it was extending the concept that we have always held to heart, that in conservation and climate action, one thing is very clear: people matter. The communities who live in the land matter, the stewards who care for it, the travelers who engage with it, the human stories essentially that are at the heart of the work. But today, we're also being asked to stretch our understanding of who and what holds agency. So in this sort of shifting paradigm to approaches that genuinely integrate local communities and the rising understanding of gender dynamics as well in solution holding and injustice, I want to start by asking Mamta, you have extensive experience building a global network that leverages the potential of women to drive systemic change. Where do you most see areas of opportunity where climate and gender intersect? And please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much, Joanna. I've been listening to some of the presentations. It's like takes you in a different world. So thank you so much for engaging me in this. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. I don't know which part of the world we are all spread across, most probably. It's late evening here in India. I'm Mamta, and I lead the movement She Changes Climate, and we are committed to build a global movement of 10,000 women driving climate action and leadership in across 20 countries in the next 5 years. Today, I'm going to just, first of all, I should say that I'm really thankful for providing the space here to share up the perspective of Changes Climate or of the women, the 30,000 plus women network that we are in. So I'm going to share a perspective of these women whom I represent today and context it to tourism. I've been thinking, what should I say? So a few things. Tourism, the way I look at it, tourism is just not about seeing new places. I think it's about the people, the ecosystem, the culture, and also the legacy that we are leaving behind. Today, tourism is contributing about 10% of global GDP and supports almost 1 in every 10 jobs worldwide. So this sector is extremely relevant and extremely important, where the narrative and where a transformed world will lead to. But alongside this benefit, we also, tourism also drives the carbon emission, there's resource extraction and displacement of local communities. And as we confront the climate crisis, and you all will agree with me that the climate crisis is here. It's right here, right now. It's not coming. It's not something that is predicted. It's here, and all of us are feeling it. And so as we confront the climate crisis and the ecological breakdown, I often ask myself, and therefore I'm asking you all, what kind of tourism are we building, and who is it serving? And I think more importantly, whose voices are shaping its future and whose are still left out in this entire narrative. I really want to thank you for opening this space for an honest and an intentional dialogue. Let's be honest, tourism as it is often practiced today doesn't work for everyone. We all are aware that the voices of indigenous people, the rural community, women, youth, gender diverse groups, the real stewards of land, water, and culture, they are routinely excluded from decision making. Women, despite being almost half of the tourism workforce, I did a bit of research to see what does it look like in the tourism sector. And so they're actually half of the tourism workforce, but they're largely concentrated in low paid, insecure, and informal roles. They rarely own the business, control the capital, or sit at the table where decisions are being made, even in tourism. So when conservation becomes just a branding tool without including the people who have protected these lands for generations, it becomes greenwashing. It's not regeneration. But on the other hand, there is a growing movement that offer another path. And some of the presentations today are classic examples of this new path. A path where we are centering women and community voices. When we do that, tourism becomes a force for justice, dignity, and ecological resilience. I'll share, I have witnessed myself, for example, or in Nepal, which is my neighbor country, community-led ecotourism is showing how local people are managing homestays, they're leading conservation, and then they're reinvesting the profits into education and clean energy. There are hundreds and thousands of examples, small pilots that are being done across this continent. In South Asia, women-led travel cooperatives are not only preserving cultural knowledge, they are also creating livelihoods that restore ecosystems. We have stories of mangroves preservation, medicinal plants, and biodiversity presentation all over in South Asia. We're increasingly seeing youth climate guides. And this is like, there are so many great examples. I've met some amazing, inspiring young, tourist climate advocates is what we call them. And they are youth climate guides, they're indigenous storytellers, they're women entrepreneurs. They are completely reshaping what travel means. And they are turning this into an act of solidarity. And it's not just sightseeing, they're really transforming the way tourism works, at the core being care, reciprocity, and justice. That's the core that I see in these new initiatives. And it begins when those most impacted by tourism have the power to shape it. So I was thinking, what does it really mean to rethink tourism? The more I think about it, it means moving from extraction to exchange, from just visiting to truly coexisting. It also means recognizing the women, especially those in the informal care, indigenous economics, as not just as passive beneficiaries, but as co-architects of sustainable future. And I will re-emphasize that there needs to be the shift in narrative of women and indigenous communities as from passive beneficiaries to co-architects of sustainable future. There are three key recommendations that I really wanted to share with you today. The first, shift tourism from top down to community-led tourism. Tourism development is designed in capital cities, boardrooms with little or almost no say from the local community, especially the women who live in the landscapes that tourists come to admire. We must flip the model. We really must flip the model. We will need to create tourism that is co-created with local people, with women at the center, as decision makers, planners, owners. And this isn't just about fairness. It's about effectiveness. Women bring deep knowledge of local ecosystems, culture, and care. When I look at the women-led homestays in Ladakh, where I have been, or the indigenous women's cooperatives in Southeast Asia, these models, they are safer, they're sustainable, and most importantly, each one of them bring the profit back into the community. The second, you have to invest in women's leadership and livelihoods. Globally, 50% women take over almost 50% of the tourism workforce. And as I said, they're often low paid, informal, seasonal. They cook, they clean, they guide and care, but they don't own the business. And we need to change that. We really need to change that. We have to move from token participation to true leadership. And third, recognize culture and care as core economic drivers. Tourism thrives on culture, heritage, hospitality, things that women have sustained for generations, from preparing local cuisine, hosting ceremonies, or guiding the nature walks. The traditional craft, for example, women are the invisible infrastructure of tourism, and yet they are rarely recognized or compensated. If we really want tourism to be sustainable, it must also be just, not for the environment only, but for the people who live there and who care for it every day. I want to close by sharing something that has deeply moved me. I don't know, maybe many of you have seen this video at a recent investor summit. The young South African poet Ashanti Kunene, she was invited to speak, and her poem was Name Me. And she started, "For the story of wealth begins with a body. Long before there were markets, before there were stocks, before there were banks, there was the land, the river, the sun. And wealth, beloved, was the abundance of the earth." She reminded me, in the most powerful and beautiful way, to recognize and honor the foundational elements of our economies and the narratives of those who have historically been instrumental yet remained unacknowledged. She ended with a line that I carry with me every single day. And she said, "She whose womb holds the future cannot be left behind." And that is the call we must answer in tourism and beyond. When women thrive, communities flourish, nature survives. And that's not just the ethical part, it's smarter, stronger, and more resilient way forward. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much, Mamta. It's very, very, very true. Such a growing concern also for us as we understand how we interpret standards, and we actually create these indicators to be able to make sure that people are included. And it's such a tricky thing to do, and so such wise words to help us understand how to improve like our nature-based services as a community. And so we brought along also the idea of expanding what rights are and what community is, and our sense of responsibility. So I wanted to ask Cormac, what is nature itself, like forests and rivers and mountains were not just resources to manage, but living beings with legal standing. You've been a key voice in shaping the idea of earth jurisprudence. So could you please explain to us what it really means? Nature as a subject of law. What is this growing movement around the rights of nature?
Thanks, Joanna. I guess my starting point is that we humans are incredibly lucky. We've been born into this stupendously beautiful and intricate community of life, and we haven't been able to find anything remotely similar to it anywhere in the universe. And so I think we should all start with the gratitude for this incredible gift that we've been given, but also to remember what Indigenous people all over the world tell us, that the land doesn't belong to us, we belong to the land. And so we've been born into this incredible earth community that nourishes us, that feeds us, that educates us, and that gives us a place to belong, because we are earthlings, and we live in community with many, not just with other people, but with the trees and the rivers and the skies. And this community is created by relationships, interrelationships between everything. And what we know is that in ways which we don't fully understand, life has created the conditions for life. So life begets life. It's stabilized the climate. It is, and the more, for example, the whales, the more they feed, the more they defecate, the more phytoplankton is created, the more krill is the more the krill population increases. So we are part of this community where the flow of life through everything is what makes it really special. But we don't govern ourselves in that way. We have convinced ourselves, and when I say we, I mean the dominant cultures. This is not true of indigenous cultures. The dominant cultures have convinced ourselves that we are separate from and superior to this community of life. And the legal systems have been based on a mechanistic worldview, which comes from the 16th and 17th century age of enlightenment in Europe. At that time, they thought that humans were the only subjects with souls, and the rest of nature were was machinery. And so the law has followed that. So only human beings and organizations like states or companies created by human beings are subjects in the eyes of the law and capable of having rights. All of nature is object. And that means that it exists to be exploited. We call it renewable, we call it resources. And if you think of the time when we define some people as objects, we call them slaves, it's very easy to see that the slave owner, who's a subject with all the rights, will exploit the slave who's the object and incapable of having rights. And so our legal systems are designed to facilitate and legitimize the exploitation of earth. You get permits to mine, licenses to fish, etc. They are permissions. They are legitimize the destruction. And of course, almost everything that causes climate change is perfectly legal. So the real question then is, what would law look like if it were based on the reality that we are members of this incredible earth community and that we need to govern ourselves in a way which enables us to be good citizens within it? And this, of course, is something which indigenous cultures all over the world have had answers to. But I think the first thing is we have to see the others, not as objects, but as beings. And legally, this means we have to recognize that trees and mountains and rivers are beings, are legal subjects capable of having rights. And as soon as we see the world as composed of beings, we enter the language of relationship and relatedness, which is really important. How do we relate to these other beings? Well, first of all, I think we have to recognize that they have the rights. Everything that has come into being has the right to be, the right to exist, and to play its role within this community of life. And as soon as we recognize that, we are corresponding duties on humans to respect the other beings and to take them into account in our decision making. So in many ways, the rights of nature is more about creating duties on humans to live as respectful neighbors to all creatures in this community of life. And then, of course, it raises the question of how do we take nature into account, other beings into account our decision making? How do we listen to them and actually hear what they need and then bring those voices into our decision making? I think this area is going to be huge in the next few decades. But the good thing is that this is actually happening. It's not just theory. To give just a couple of examples, all over the world, both legislatures have been enacting laws which recognize this, and judges have been making judgments. So importantly, in 2008, Ecuador adopted a constitution which recognized the rights of nature as a means to enable people to live harmoniously and well within nature. In 2010, there was the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth adopted in Bolivia at a People's World Conference. And since then, courts and legislatures all over the world have recognized mountains, rivers, forests as beings with rights. And to end off, I think that this rights of nature movement, which is now growing speed very quickly around the world, is really essential if we are going to have a future as members of this community of life. If you want to be part of the community, you have to play by the rules of that community. And what that means is we need to align our human legal systems with the laws of nature. And the purpose of our legal systems must not be a colonial purpose to exploit and extract as much as we can from Mother Earth. It's a system where our purpose is to live as productive and good citizens within this community, so that we seek human well-being through the contributions we make to the community as a whole, not by living at its expense and degrading it. And the good news is that the world is a much nicer place if you see it as animate. If you think of all of you looking after these really special places around the world. If you can bring people to those places and say, you're not just visiting a place, you're here to meet the members of my community. You're here to meet the river, ask who are you, to listen to the forest, and to interact with them as beings. It really makes the world a much more beautiful place to live in, and will help us, I believe, gradually recognize the reality that we are not, that our role is not to be colonizers and exploiters, but to be good members of this community of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Cormac. And it makes so much sense. Like what you said about you're here to meet the river and you're here to meet the entity that you're here with. It also places such a, in our industry, you know, in the tourism, it's such a special role for guiding, for example. And I wanted to ask you, especially around nature-based tourism, how do you see nature-based tourism playing a role in this advancing shift to supporting the recognition of Earth's rights?
Well, I think that if we want to learn from nature and how to live in accordance with its rules, then the beautiful wild places that are truly wild are like universities. We need to go there because that's where the knowledge is, and to see how they operate and to learn from them. So I think if we come into those places with great respect for the indigenous beings, not just human indigenous people, but also indigenous trees and plants and insects, I think if tourists are taught that approach, it will do an incredible amount of good, and they can take that with them when they go back to the cities. We've just initiated a project here in Cape Town to recognize Table Mountain as a being with it's an early stage, but everybody in Cape Town loves the mountain, and I think it's an incredibly unifying platform. So I think the sense of belonging to something greater, which you can teach through teaching this Earth community, is really good for people. It helps combat the sort of self-serving narcissism that we see so too much of in today. And we also have another up with Antarctica, to get Antarctica seen as the equivalent of a state. It's far too wild and fierce to be ruled by people. It's you just think you could stick your flag in it and own it. What we need to recognize is it's a magnificent being, and its future, our future, is very much tied up with it, and we need to protect it.
Makes sense. Mamta, I know that we're coming into almost into time, but I have a question here that I also wanted to ask you. How can change makers better collaborate with various stakeholders, including indigenous communities that may not see themselves as part of the conservation space?
The first thing that is required is the basic change in mindset. So you have to see them as the co-architect of your initiative. That's the first thing. The second thing is what Cormac also said, it's just not applies to universities, it applies to businesses. When you actually going to local communities, you go there with the respect, the dignity, and the right the community has in that piece of work. The third important factor, which I feel is very important, there has to be an economic narrative behind this. You cannot have, you need to bring in dignity and economics when you are developing or designing initiatives with the community. Remember, they have to be at the core. For years, for decades, we have, when we work with community in many in the ecotourism, but they are always looked at beneficiaries. There is a lack of dignity in the approach with which you are engaging them. I feel dignity and economic justice from an equitable point of view is very important when you are wanting to engage them.
Thank you, Mamta. That is a very, very solid answer. And then I had the Q&A box, and I have one more question, if that's okay for Cormac. What challenges have you faced in trying to make the rights of nature more inclusive?
That's a very interesting question. I think it's inherently inclusive in the sense that if one looks at the great struggles, whether it's to end slavery, to end apartheid, to fight for women's rights, etc., they've all involved expanding the class of rights holders, indigenous peoples organizations, and so we are that, but we're expanding it to include the whole Earth community. I think what's been very important is of Indigenous people in the movement. It really, in many ways, that's the guiding spirit and the source much of the knowledge and understanding of the movement. So including the voices and people has been very, very important. I'm not quite sure why. Most of the people in the movement are women. So it is really a women's-led movement, although it wasn't designed in that way. So I think our approach is inherently inclusive and because I believe that diversity is one of the principles of the universe. If you go out into nature, you see diversity everywhere, and diversity is a strength, not a weakness. And I think that's reflected in our movement.
That is really right. We see even in Brazil, trying to establish an economy that makes sense. The way you grow food is inclusive of diversity, and the way that you create a society that is inclusive of diversity. And that's the source of innovation and more creation. So it's really right. We've come the half hour. I know that so many of you have been here since my 7:30 a.m. I'm so to get to have connected you both and to get to connect you with the rest of the long run membership. I know that Cormac, you had participated in the African regional meeting, and then Mamta, you were a partner of Sinaldo Vale, so you are somehow connected to already, but I'm so happy to sort of plug you into everybody else and get to know your work. I hope many more come. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. And thank you for our members to sticking around and listening to all the stories of all our members. Remember that there's tomorrow still, we are opening up with a panel that is called Measure to Manage, to understand how to measure and interpret our data for storytelling as well. And then we have sessions across all the regions and then our finishing. So thank you guys again, and we'll see you tomorrow for some more Impact Show.